Hey, brutal heat ending the summer this week in the Northeast. I know a place where you can get out of the heat where it's nice and cool. Parks Casino. It might be back to school for the kids, but the action, excitement, entertainment, still sizzling at Parks Casino and Sportsbook, the only casino and sportsbook that I recommend. Award-winning dining, plus a special discount for military, first responders, medical professionals. Isn't that great? Experience the open-air Liberty Bell Beer Garden. Indulge in the delightful culinary experience of the all-new Bamboo Noodle House and savor your favorite sushi items and enjoy a wide selection of Japanese whiskey and sake. They've got it all going on, not the least of which is 3,200 state-of-the-art slots, 115 table games, and the best sports book on the entire East Coast. Joe Conklin's Comedy Night upcoming. Every other week he's there. Really a funny guy. Pointer Sisters, Buddy Guy, The Spinners, Gladys Knight, Air Supply. I'm lying alone with my head on the phone till it hurts. Something like that. For all things Parks Casino, visit parkscasino.com. The casino and sportsbook. This is how you win. You got to be 21. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Okay, one more time. The short version about that Dr. Fauci interview. Last week, there were a number of stories that I reported on about a new strain of the COVID virus and isolated, but some instances where there were mask requirements being implemented. Lionsgate, the studio in Santa Monica, is top of mind. Fact check me on this, but I think that they were one of those. And I was then reflecting on the loss of faith in our institutions. There was a Gallup survey that I discussed recently talking about diminished faith that people have in government institutions of all kind. And I got to thinking, in terms of a poll question of the day at Smerconish.com, if government, more specifically, if the CDC were to make a mask recommendation, would people necessarily follow it? And that was a poll question last Wednesday, I think. I know this. We had nearly 25,000 votes cast, and 75% in round numbers of our audience said, yes, if the CDC were to advise that it's time to wear a mask, they would go along with it. I also had a guest on the subject, an epidemiologist from Vanderbilt by the name of Dr. Schaffner, and we talked about masks and the efficacy of masks, and doing this from memory, but I have a distinct recollection of him saying that an N95 and a K95 worn properly are effective for the wearer of that mask. Okay, we go to the phones in the midst of all of this, talking about diminished faith in institutions, the rise of a strain of COVID, what about masks, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say that the callers more represented the 25% who said they wouldn't go along with a mask recommendation than the 75% who said they would mask up. Probably a bit of confirmation bias, right? Like the most passionate are the ones that often dial the phone, and the ones that were dialing the phone last week when we had this conversation were people who were upset at the idea that they might be advised to wear a mask. There was one particular caller I remember who said, well, what about the Cochrane report? The Cochrane report showed that masks are ineffective. So, with all of this in my head, as I've often told you, the SiriusXM radio program here on POTUS is often a proving ground for CNN on Saturday mornings, because I get 15 hours a week of live radio on SiriusXM, but I get 1 hour, which is really more like 40 minutes of programming on CNN, and it's 4 different segments, and that's it. So, whatever's hot and seems to really strike a chord on radio, I'm always thinking about for television, and this was no different. So I started to think to myself that a good segment for CNN would be, would people follow guidance from the government if they were told that masks were necessary, prudent, in their best interest? Who better to have as a guest to talk about that subject than Dr. Anthony Fauci? So we invited Dr. Fauci. He's been a guest of mine previously on CNN, and he accepted the invitation. And now the question I'm wondering is, okay, how do I get into this? In reading in, this Cochrane report was a continuing source of attention. Dr. Lena Wen, by the way, also a frequent guest of mine. She, a CNN medical analyst, former Baltimore health commissioner, now a professor at GW, had a nice write-up about the Cochrane report when it first came out, saying that it's a highly reputable source, that they did 78 randomized controlled trials, and that they conclude by saying we are uncertain whether wearing masks of N95 P2 respirators help to slow the spread of respiratory viruses, giving some heft to what the caller said, although the caller had a more negative interpretation of what Cochrane said about masks. Then I find Bret Stephens writing in the New York Times soon after Cochrane came out, and he tells the story of how a journalist named Marianne DeMasi had conducted an interview with the lead author of Cochrane. Boy, I feel like I'm really going into the weeds. This was supposed to be the short version. And that the lead author, an Oxford epidemiologist whose name is Tom Jefferson, said there is no evidence that masks, make any difference. So I thought, okay, that's the way I'll get into this subject with Dr. Fauci, never intending. It's not my style. Like, you listen to me, you watch me, I'm not a gotcha person. I'm all about having the dialogue. So I was looking forward to having Dr. Fauci and to be able to say, hey, here's this study that gets critical acclaim and seems to conclude, and the lead author tells a journalist, as reported by Bret Stephens, that they are ineffective. Like, what's the response to that? So, indeed, that's what I did on CNN. I raised the subject by reading the Bret Stephens piece aloud. We put it up on the screen. Dr. Fauci then responds to it. He says, when you're talking about the effect of on the epidemic or pandemic as a whole, start over, Michael. When you're talking about the effect on the epidemic or the pandemic as a whole, the data are less strong, but there are other studies out there that show that at an individual level, for individuals, they might be protective. He gets shellacked in the conservative media, not so much for what he said, but frankly, just for the fact that I'd read aloud this reference to Cochrane. And the thing just went viral. Helped, I'm sure, by the fact that Rand Paul had tweeted the interview. And consequently, I found myself this weekend continually being told in social media or by people in my orbit, hey, they're showing you on Newsmax or on Fox News. Interestingly, Marianne DeMasi goes back to the lead author, Dr. Jefferson, the epidemiologist from Oxford, and she shares with him, she herself a PhD, shares with him the Fauci clip to get his response. In short version, which is, so Fauci is saying that masks work for individuals, but not at a population level. Says Dr. Jefferson, that doesn't make sense. And he says there are other studies, but what studies? He doesn't name them, so I cannot interpret his remarks without knowing what he's referring to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I sent Dr. Fauci a text yesterday, and my text said, hey, it's Michael Smerconish. Having received a ton of media alerts pertaining to our discussion, I feel obliged to write. My intention was never to ask a gotcha question. My objective is never to lead the news at Fox or Newsmax. My aim was only to spark a question as to whether we will ever mask up again. The reaction to our conversation gave me my answer. And by the way, I don't feel comfortable reading his response because I didn't ask for permission to do so. But suffice it to say, he replied in an understanding and grateful way. I think would be an accurate way to say it. But to the point I made to him, the answer to my question from last week, will we again, if we need to, forget the 75% who responded to my survey question at Smerconish.com. The passion rests with the 25%, and that's an unscientific poll. I don't know the proportion in society. But my point is this, the reaction to my conversation with Dr. Fauci and the way that it was seized upon by different corners of the political marketplace to suit their own objective told me everything I needed to know. The divide is so deep on political issues, but this one in particular, the response to COVID, that if Cochrane says masking doesn't stop community transmission. This actually is their finding. That they say that masking doesn't stop community transmission where adherence is variable. What does that mean, Michael? It means like unless we're all wearing a mask and wearing it properly, then we're not going to stop community transmission. I'm here to tell you, based on the reaction to my conversation with Dr. Fauci, that adherence will be variable because there are a lot of people out there that are not putting on a mask again. And oh, by the way, as if I needed a news hook for all of this, the First Lady now has COVID, which is the lead story today at Smerconish.com, the Tuesday edition of the newsletter. All right, so that's the short form explanation of my conversation with Dr. Fauci. More to come on that, I can assure you. Other news, other headlines from the Tuesday edition of the Smerconish.com newsletter. I need to say this. It's really important, and I'm so grateful. The number of the day is 72.98%. We have more than 100,000 daily subscribers of the newsletter. You know it's my baby. You know it's my passion project. 72.98% is our open rate at current time, meaning Joe gives me the metrics every 2 weeks for social media and what's going on with the newsletter and so forth. Joe Elias, thank you, Joe. 72.98% open rate is extraordinary because everybody has a newsletter. Every news outlet has a newsletter today, and most of them go unopened. Most of them go unopened. Our newsletter is not only subscribed to on a widespread basis, people actually read it. They open it. They look at the headlines. And you know who I know? You know who I know, TC, is a big demographic for the newsletter? People who do what I do for a living. Because they are...
Oh, you mean the show prep?
Yeah.
What?
They are relying on... And it's fine. I mean, a shout out every once in a while would be appropriate. But I know...
You're big on attribution, so you're only asking people to do what you're doing too.
Yeah, I know that they are relying on me for show prep. Hey, I'd rely on me. If I were on air later than Michael Smerconish's newsletter comes out, you're damn right. I'd be looking at what are the 20 links that he has hand selected that he thinks are worthy of conversation today. 72.98% is off the charts.
It's a huge number.
Off the charts.
Huge number.
So thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I feel like so I don't know, empowered, emboldened to say, forward it to a friend. It's confirmation that you're doing them a favor and let them subscribe. So that's point number one, 72.98% open rate. I'm really proud and I'm grateful to all of you. Second point, I don't want the day to end without me saying thank you for buying so much merch over the weekend. Beach towels and T-shirts and signed copies of Talk. And everybody kind of got it. Some didn't get it initially, that the code was changing every day. There were different code words. TC After Dark was one of our secret codes.
I was so proud. And we had to be really careful not to say the code here or on air. Right. That was scary.
Yeah. Talk a Novel. The Color Purple, and Lightning Round. I think those were the 4 codes that we used for the Smerch merch, 50% discount. So
I love it.
So thank you for that. All right, enough from me. TC, what else caught your eye from the weekend or from today from the newsletter?
Well, what caught my eye from the weekend had to be possibly the most self-serving headline I've ever seen appear at Smerconish.com, the newsletter or website. And that would be this from the Daily Star. Quote, "Why bearded lads are more attractive to women, according to science."
Have you ever, first of all, have you ever heard of the Daily Star before? The Daily Star.
Know that September 2nd was World Beard Day? There's a lot going on in this story.
How could I not go with a story that said bearded lads are more attractive to women?
Because honestly, I can hear you like someone reading it with a British accent, the whole thing. It was the most appealing story for you. And I understand in such a variety of ways. It's got data, it's got research. Obviously you're both, I believe, confident, virile, and like, everything about bearded men is written in this article. So yes, very, very masculine.
If there had been a story about bearded ladies, I might have run it. Okay. So
topless men and headless bar or whatever it was.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that story. Right. Thank you for noticing.
No problem. Hey, how about this Delaware story? The police blocked a man from warning about a speed trap, and he won $50,000 because the Delaware State Police, the federal lawsuit he filed, said that they violated his constitutional rights by preventing him from warning motorists about a speed trap. He had a sign up that was warning people about a radar ahead, and he said, "Hey, it's my constitutional right to do that." I always. Should I admit this? But like, I will flip the lights if I see someone. I don't think you're supposed to do that, right? That's
what I was getting to, because when I saw the headline, I thought it was another of those cases. And they come up from time to time about the propriety and the legality of flipping your lights at oncoming drivers. But as you've already pointed out, this was different. This guy had a cardboard sign that said,
"What's his deal?
Radar ahead." After he raised a middle finger at troopers while driving away from an initial encounter, he was stopped and cited for improper use of a hand signal. That charge was later dropped. The episode on March 11, 2022, captured on cell phone videos taken by this gentleman and included in his complaint, as well as on a dashboard cam in the vehicle of the state troopers.
So was the middle finger the inappropriate signaling?
Well, no. I mean, he's got a speech right.
I'm so confused.
Yeah, no, he's got a speech right. Two different things.
The middle finger is different from the sign. The middle finger was dropped. The sign was the judgment. Okay, I get it. Yeah, that was a very interesting one. Hey, speaking of like taking cell phone videos, the Sun piece that you posted over the weekend about the town in Ireland that the entire town voted not to have their kids get cell phones until they're of a certain age in secondary school. I loved that, because isn't that the whole point? Like, it's really hard to keep your kids from having a cell phone if other kids have cell phones. And so the entire town said, nope, we're not doing it. And it worked.
Yeah. So they, as you've pointed out, you got to have buy-in from everybody, because
everyone.
Because it eliminates the peer pressure. If none of the kids have a phone until middle school, I think it was, then they're all on similar footing, and there's not going to be that pressure. Well, I can't stay in touch with all of my friends. It's the first I've ever heard of that kind of an experiment taking place. I also loved the picture of that community. It just looked like it was gorgeous and a nice place to visit. Yeah, it is one of the toughest decisions faced by parents, when to give in to their younger children's constant demands for a smartphone. Startling recent figures from communications regulator Ofcom show that 20% of kids have a smartphone by the age of 3. Can that be right?
No.
Can that be right?
No.
And it rises to 55% between the ages of 8 and 11. The entire parent population of Greystones in County Wicklow got together to agree not to buy smartphones for their kids until they were in secondary school. So there you go.
Some high-profile deaths over the weekend. Very sad. Mohammed Al-Fayed, former Harrods owner, who we probably all know as father of Dodi Al-Fayed, who was with Diana, Princess of Wales, when she died over the weekend at age 94.
Could have been a grandfather, or maybe you would say a step-grandparent to William and Harry, right? I mean, if he would have been Diana's father-in-law if that marriage had been consummated. And what a character. I know I've made reference before. It stands the test of time. If you want a great read, Maureen Orth wrote a Vanity Fair profile of Mohammed Al-Fayed back in the heyday of his Harrods ownership, and it has always hung with me. And go read it if you have any appetite for that era of royal watching.
In today's Smerconish.com newsletter, Jimmy Buffett's final concert was a surprise performance at a Rhode Island restaurant. This was in July. One of his bandmates was supposed to be playing there. 100 people were scheduled to come. That day, they called and said, hey, Jimmy wants to get out of the house. July. This is, a month and a half ago. And he came out and performed and was amazing, evidently. And that was his last public concert.
I thought it was an amazing story.
I'm so sad he's gone. I thought it was such a neat story, Michael.
I'm sure.
Such a neat story.
I'm sure many of us, I listened to a ton of Jimmy Buffett this weekend.
Oh,
a ton
nonstop.
of Jimmy
I
Buffett
think
this
everybody
weekend.
did.
Yeah, Come Monday. I love Come Monday. Pirate Looks at 40. Margaritaville, I've heard too many times, if that's possible, but I loved his body of work. He reminded me, I should have said it when he was alive, of Harry Chapin. I love the stories.
Wow.
I love the stories in the songs. Good stuff. One more, TC. What's your fave?
Well, I mean, maybe we'll have to go with that really interesting piece about Trump's pen pal, being a pen pal, and having his aides give him printouts of tweets, et cetera, and then he'll write back to them, and then they'll take a picture and send it back. I mean, it's the craziest thing I've ever seen.
Trump is a letter writer, not in the sense of scripting out a whole letter, but of writing notes. He's a note writer. And the story that we had over the weekend at Smerconish.com talked about the methodology that he uses. He will write a note on something. It'll be photographed. It'll be transmitted to the recipient, oftentimes young Republicans and young conservatives. And then the staff will then follow up and send the hard copy of the image. And many times, by the way, critical comments that he'll send to journalists, although he does less of that these days. But really good stuff. Really good stuff. Okay, thank you for 72.98%. Keep subscribing and opening the newsletter. Make sure that you vote on today's poll question: which is the greater political liability for the president? Is it his age or is it the economy? See ya.